Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live today on Tuesday afternoon, and we are going to be breaking down Monday Night Football, the first of the year between the San Francisco 49ers and the New York Jets that took place last night. Is there cause for concerns for the Jets, who ended up suffering a loss? We will dive into that and more, and then we will be continuing on with some other takeaways from this past weekend in the NFL. I want to touch on where the Chicago Bears stand, considering that they were able to mount a large comeback against the Tennessee Titans, but did so without really any help from number one overall pick Caleb Williams. So we will talk about that. Additionally, we'll dive into the performance of the 2023 number one overall pick in Bryce Young, who also mightily struggled in the season opener. And we'll talk about the levels of concern there, as things have not gone well for Carolina and Bryce Young since they drafted him. And we will also be touching on one last team that offensively really struggled over the course of the weekend, the New York Giants, who were the one team in week one to not score a touchdown, and things seem like they are only getting more dysfunctional as time goes on here, so we will discuss that as well. And then to wrap up the show, I will be giving my thoughts on the college football AP rankings that dropped a couple days ago, now headed into week 3. Where do the top powerhouse programs stand in the eyes of the national media? But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. We here at the GSMC Sports Podcast thrive off of the interactions that we have with our viewers. So whether you have a quick comment or a lengthy question, let us know what your thoughts are on the latest developments in the sports world, as we do have Grega John here in the comment section saying hi. So, let us know what your thoughts are on all of the latest happenings in sports, and we'll try and get to as many comments as possible. Additionally, if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can go to the Super Chat feature that is available on YouTube to get your comments to pop up on screen. You can leave a tip or donation. It helps us here a lot at the GSMC Sports Network to continue to grow and provide to you the sports content that you are searching for. And you can additionally do so by going to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. So anything would be very greatly appreciated on either account. But now diving into last night's game, the San Francisco 49ers were able to make a little bit of a statement with their week 1 win, opening up the season against the New York Jets, who are a hopeful team this upcoming season now that they have Aaron Rodgers finally fully healthy. He made it through this full game, but didn't go exactly as planned for the New York Jets, as they end up suffering a loss to San Francisco. And I think that, from initially here, from the 49ers perspective, this is a team that had a lot of noise surrounding them during the offseason with the holdouts of Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams, but ultimately they just played this game business as usual, ended up rolling over the Jets. The offense took no real steps back, and they win this game 32-19. And that was even with Christian McCaffrey out for this game, ruled out a couple hours before the game kicked off, and it was Jordan Mason getting his first career start. Interesting subplot there in terms of the timeline, as when the 49ers decided to rule out McCaffrey, Mason had previously said that he knew that he was going to start on Friday, but McCaffrey wasn't ruled out until just before the game. So the 49ers may have some sort of investigation on their hands there, but, or we'll let that be. Takes away from what was an excellent first career start from Jordan Mason, who you have to feel good for. He was very impressive in this game. 28 carries, 147 yards, and a touchdown. You didn't even really notice the absence of Christian McCaffrey from a game planning perspective. Yeah, maybe you got a little bit extra Deebo Samuel taking some carries himself, but Mason was, like I mentioned, very impressive. I thought he did an excellent job of especially weaving through traffic, and just sort of the discipline of a runner was really good to see from him, and it just shows that the 49ers continue to manufacture different skill position players that have impacts on them. But like I mentioned, Mason, 147 yards on the ground. The San Francisco 49ers as a whole, 180 yards on the ground. And that does sort of bring me to my first takeaway, that this was a very disappointing defensive performance from the Jets. Now, they are supposed to be one of the best defenses in the league, and they did hold up pretty well in those first two possessions, forcing a 3-and-out on the first drive, and then the second drive, they were actually backed up on their own side of the field because of the Breece Hall fumble that gave the 49ers a short field, but ultimately the Jets were able to sort of buckle down there and force the 49ers into a field goal. So I do give them credit there. I give them a pass, I suppose. But the 49ers did end up scoring on their final 8 drives of the game, including that field goal. And in large part, it was because of the fact that the Niners were just able to run the ball down the throats of New York, which is something that was not really anticipated. The strength of the Jets' defense is more so in the secondary, I would argue, but I do think that they have a lot of talent in that front seven as well, that they feel like they should be able to rely on a little bit more. And I did think it was a pretty disappointing performance from them as a whole. Now, ultimately, I do sort of look at it as this is something that could be semi-easily fixed, because Quincy Williams and C.J. Mosley are two of the top linebackers, especially in the run game in the NFL, in my opinion. And then you actually got, some decent production from some surprises. Clemens was really impressive throughout the game. Jermaine Johnson didn't necessarily totally have his presence felt, but he was getting into the backfield. Quinnen Williams in the middle, though, is where you would hope to get a little bit more of a presence, especially considering he is one of those big contracts on the Jets defense. But I expect him to be able to rebound from this game, and I don't think that this should be a massive concern. That being said, Robert Saleh, so many questions surrounding him for this upcoming season, and his backbone as a coach is on the defensive side of the ball. So just flat out, the Jets are going to need to be better on that side if they want to, be the team in the playoff, maybe even Super Bowl contender that they were hoping for. But another sort of interesting subplot coming out of this is because the defense struggled so much on the line of scrimmage, it does make you wonder if the Jets are maybe a little bit more inclined heading into next week to try and resolve this contract holdout with Hassan Reddick, who they, of course, traded for in the offseason and is yet to report for the Jets this upcoming season. So that is not a good sign, but again, ultimately, the fact that they feel like they might need a little bit more push up front could be something that gets this deal done. We will see there. But like I mentioned, the Jets really struggled to stop the run in this game, which did also in turn impact the overall pace of this game because the 49ers absolutely dominated the time of possession. San Francisco had the ball for 39 of the 60 minutes in this game, and it's due to the fact that the 49ers were able to just sort of bleed clock with a lead using that run game, but it was also due to the fact that the Jets offense was pretty mediocre last night. And it's a little bit of a catch-22 because the Jets offense also didn't get to develop any sort of rhythm on that side of the ball because they hardly had possession themselves, which sort of brings me into my overall takeaways from that Jets offense, and that it's Aaron Rodgers playing basically his first game in, over a year plus some. Week 18 in the 2022 season is the last time we actually saw Aaron Rodgers. And I thought that all things considered, he's a 41-year-old quarterback coming off of a torn Achilles. I thought he looked fine. I thought he looked sort of good. Had an interception in there. Really wasn't all that much of his fault. It was a deflected ball. Could have been placed a little bit better, maybe. But that was also a really good defensive play as well to give him a little bit of wiggle room there, considering the fact that, Lenore got his arm in on that play to Garrett Wilson and was able to pop it up to another defender. So it's not like it was a bad throw or a bad decision. I thought it was more so just a good defensive play. Rodgers' stats as a whole last night, he was 13 of 21, 167 yards, a touchdown, and that interception that I mentioned. And I thought he looked mostly comfortable. Now, there is very clearly still the arm talent, and the other part of it as well is the mental capabilities of Aaron Rodgers. Such a classic of he ended up coaxing the 49ers defense to jump off sides. He used the free play to throw the touchdown strike to Allen Lazard. Broadcast made an interesting note that it was his 18th touchdown on a free play, which is 3 times more than anybody else in NFL history. So those are the types of things you can expect Aaron Rodgers to bring to the game. It's having a, reliable quarterback from a mental perspective, which just frankly, they did not get these past couple years with what's been a little bit of a revolving door. Yes, Zach Wilson, didn't pan out for them, but he wasn't the only culprit. They tried to roll the dice on a bunch of different quarterbacks. None of them really panned out for them, and Aaron Rodgers just should be able to provide some more stability than what the Jets have seen in these past couple seasons. But ultimately, there were some physical limitations for him. The offensive line did a pretty good job protecting him, so it's not like he was under duress a ton. I would probably expect moving forward this season that as the pressure on him does start to ramp up, that we could see him maybe getting rid of the ball a little bit sooner. We saw him do that a little bit in 2022 towards the end of Tom Brady's career. That was definitely a prominent theme, that he was just trying to avoid taking those hits. And Rodgers, it's for the better of the franchise if he passes up on sort of sticking out a play and trying to make something special happen. He knows that his presence is just a massive key, and he can't afford getting hurt. He did have a little bit of a scramble out to his left at one point, and you could see it wasn't gimpy necessarily, but it did not look anywhere near as fluid as we've seen Aaron Rodgers in these, scramble rollout reps that has, been a little bit of his calling card throughout the course of his career, where he has been one of the greatest quarterbacks, at least in my lifetime, of throwing on the run. I just don't know if that's really to be expected for it to be a prominent part of his game at this point. Again, he's just trying to preserve his body and make sure that he can actually stay out there on the field. So I did think that was notable, but ultimately Rodgers was fine. Where this offense needs to evolve a little bit more, well, we stick with the passing game anyways. Only 2 wide receivers for the Jets in this game even saw targets. It was Garrett Wilson with 11, Allen Lazard with 9. Breece Hall got a number of targets. Tight end Tyler Conklin got a couple. So it's not like it was solely Lazard and Wilson. But this is a wide receiver core that doesn't have a ton of depth, in my opinion. They brought in Mike Williams, who was a non-factor in this game. Wonder if maybe they're just still trying to rehab him a little bit more, coming off of his torn ACL from last year. Does have some extensive injury history that maybe he works his way into the rotation a little bit more. Corley as well. the wide receiver that they drafted, somebody that I think could maybe emerge a little bit as a slot receiver, a little bit of a speed guy for them. Garrett Wilson can do it all. I think Allen Lazard is going to be a little bit more in that intermediate game, just being the Rodgers check down almost, just based off of the chemistry that the two of them have. That Malachi Corley could maybe emerge into a little bit of a game breaker on the perimeter, and, maybe directly underneath, and maybe be able to take the top off of the defense. That's big ask for a rookie receiver, but I do think that they need to sort of round out their offensive attack a little bit more. And again, I thought the offensive line was pretty solid for them, but that being said, didn't get a ton of push in the run game. Breece Hall, who is one of the best running backs in the league, he was good, not great. 3.4 yards per carry. You would like to see more from that. Now, that's not, again, all on his fault. There were a couple short yardage situations late in this game. The 2-point conversion and the 3rd and short that occurred on the Jets, one of the Jets' final drives where it was 3rd and inches. Both times they tried to just run Breece Hall up the middle, got no push on the line, and Breece Hall isn't exactly a powerful running back that is going to sort of run through defenders. He's more of a speed and acceleration running back and can be a proponent in the passing game. But I was a little concerned about that. That being said, I'm a big fan of Braylon Allen, who didn't get much playing time last night, but the Jets running back that they drafted in the 4th round out of Wisconsin looks like a little bit of a physical specimen, one of the youngest players in the NFL. I think they mentioned on the broadcast last night that he is the youngest player in the NFL, but 6'1", 235 pounds. I really like the size that he could bring for the Jets, and I wonder if he starts to take on a bigger role for himself as well as the season moves on. But as for that offensive line, it's 3 new starters this season. I think it's going to take them a little bit of time to build up that chemistry and cohesion that they can better operate. But again, they did a good job of protecting Aaron Rodgers. You just want a little bit more push in the run game, but you're also looking at a couple guys as well coming from the Ravens last season in Morgan Moses and John Simpson, that they know what it takes to be sufficient as a run blocking team, considering they both were starters for the number 1 rush offense in the league last year. So I think that the offensive line is going to continue to get better. If you're a believer in the Jets, then I wouldn't be abandoning ship at this point. That being said, I do think there are some real limitations. The passing game, I don't know. Like I said, I like the idea of Corley maybe stepping into a bigger role, but I wouldn't bet my life on it. And I don't know. Again, only 2 wide receivers even getting targets. It's just not really a great sign to me in terms of the overall functionality. Now, that's also a bit of a result of it just being week 1 and Rodgers not getting a ton of game reps with any of these other wide receivers. So we'll see there. But Robert Saleh definitely has the pressure building on him a little bit more. You're facing Kyle Shanahan, maybe the best offensive mind in football, that has probably been preparing for this game for over a month. So I'll give him a little bit of leeway. But ultimately, the Jets, they fully understand the level of pressure that's surrounding them. And I think that Aaron Rodgers especially is somebody who is going to, not get in his head too much and panic based off of just a week 1 loss. It's a long season, so we'll have to see ultimately how this pans out for them. But the Jets now have a short week because they play this upcoming week on Thursday Night Football. Double checking here, but it is, no, I'm wrong. It's that they have a Thursday Night Football game coming up in week 3 against the Patriots. This week on the road at Tennessee against a weaker team. I think we see the offense take some steps forward. Final notes here on the 49ers as well. Like I mentioned, it was just kind of business as usual for them, even with all of the noise that occurred for them during the offseason. They just continue to be a machine. No Christian McCaffrey, no problem. The one thing is that Brandon Ayuk did look a little, out of sorts. Now that's something that I easily think they're going to be able to overcome as the 49ers move on here, that he just needs to, after his holdout this offseason, get a little bit back acclimated to this 49ers roster. Only 2 catches in this game on 5 targets, ended up dropping a touchdown pass. So he knows that he's going to need to be better, and I have no worries that he's going to be able to. And then the last note I have is that Devondre Campbell, looking like a pretty good pickup for the 49ers, former All-Pro with Green Bay, and the 49ers kind of got him for nothing. It's not going to be the flashiest signing of the offseason by any means, but I think it's a great replacement in the meantime while Dre Greenlaw is recovering from his torn Achilles injury, and Campbell can provide depth and a little bit of a different look for the 49ers moving forward this season as well. So I thought that he looked pretty good in this game. But let me know what your takeaways were in the comment section, as I want to sort of take a step back and look more so at some of the other games from the weekend that we didn't get to cover yesterday. We're going to be diving into the play of Caleb Williams and the wild game that was the Chicago Bears versus the Tennessee Titans, and talk about what it means for the outlook for the Bears moving forward, with Caleb Williams struggling and the defense making plays and also benefiting a little bit from a lackluster Tennessee offense. So we will be diving into that, but first we're going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up in the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it. The news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be moving on from one of the weirder games of the weekend, and that was the Chicago Bears facing off against the Tennessee Titans, and it took a little bit of a miraculous comeback for the Bears to pull off this win. Now, the Titans had a 17-0 lead in the second quarter. By no means is that insurmountable, but it feels insurmountable if you were to tell me beforehand that their offense would not score any touchdowns. That feels borderline impossible, but the Bears were able to somehow climb their way back into this game without ever really finding a groove offensively, thanks to a blocked punt and returning that for a touchdown and a pick six to end up winning the game 24-17. And in this game, Caleb Williams, who is expected to be the savior of the Chicago Bears, was most certainly not that in this game. 14 of 29, 93 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And the stats are very accurate as to how it actually looked. Caleb Williams, he was very inaccurate in this game. Some of the decision making with him as well, taking some bad sacks, which was always sort of a bit of a tendency with him at USC. It's also similarly a tendency of what Justin Fields was like when he was in Chicago. So a little bit of flashbacks there. Definitely a similarity between the two players. But Caleb, again, none of it was very clean with him whatsoever. Now, he did have a pass that should have gone for a touchdown that was dropped by Keenan Allen. So you can make that argument that he should have had a touchdown. But either way, Caleb already sort of owed Keenan Allen a mulligan anyways because Caleb missed Keenan on a deep shot earlier in the game. So I suppose it evens out for the two of them, but not something that you really want to feel great about if you are a Bears fan, the fact that they did look so disjointed. But that being said, I did come away from this game with a little bit more of a positive attitude towards the Chicago Bears. Now, again, that being said, you're going to need to get more production out of Caleb Williams because against basically any team other than the Tennessee Titans, if you're not going to win that game. Or maybe the Giants, who also didn't score a touchdown. And we're going to get into their situation later in the show here. But that's not a recipe for success. Of course, they know that. But that being said, I mean, the whole idea about Caleb Williams is going to come in and be the face of the franchise like the Bears have never had before. Never had a 4,000-yard passer in the history of their existence. The only team in the NFL to not have a quarterback pass for 4,000 yards in a season. So again, all this pressure on Caleb Williams to become the hero for them. And the defense, I feel like, is going to come out of this game and say, wait a second, who said we need saving in the first place? This is a group that was really turning themselves around from, I'd say, the trade deadline on last season, where I know this game is against the Titans, but again, it goes beyond just week 1 of 2024. After acquiring Montez Sweat at the trade deadline last year, they have played in 10 games since then, and they are allowing just 17.8 points per game, and that would be one of the best marks in the NFL if you are sort of taking that for a full season sample size. Now, it's not like they've played a number of excellent offenses along the way there, and that they've been sticking it to, but one of those games against the Detroit Lions, pretty good, the number one, something like that, offense from last season. So it's not like they had a ton of cupcakes either. Also played the Packers in week 18, so there are some good wins in there, but 17.8 would rank in the top 4 if you are looking at last season's points per game allowed. So I think that Matt Eberflus, who has this backbone of being a very good defensive coach, I think he knows what he's doing, and I think that they are going to continue to get better because they have all of these young pieces on defense that I think can be really special for them. Tyreek Stevenson, even though that pick six was a little bit gift-wrapped by one of the worst decisions from a quarterback that I've seen in recent years by Will Levis, under pressure, just trying to flip it out like that to the sideline. It was a disastrous play 100%, but Tyreek Stevenson has been an up-and-coming player, now entering his second season. I'm a fan of a lot of their secondary players. I'm a big fan of Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker. It's a hard-hitting defense that is, a little bit, at this point now with Hard Knocks and everything, a lot more people are on board. But last year, I would say, was a little bit of a nobody believes in us type of team. And going into last season as well, I was not a believer in that defense. But I was just really impressed by the internal development that the Chicago Bears have had, especially on that defensive side of the ball. And now, all of that being said, they ended up winning this game by getting nothing out of Caleb Williams. And again, like I mentioned, that can't be the recipe for success for good, but the idea in that locker room is that Caleb is so much better than what he just gave the Bears in this game. And that it maybe will take some time, a lot of moving pieces on that offense, like I mentioned, not just Caleb coming into the organization for the first time, but Keenan Allen as well. You have Rome Odunze, who did suffer an MCL sprain and is expected to be out for a few weeks, so that is definitely a tough blow to that Bears offense, but ultimately, I have confidence that they're going to be able to take steps forward from here. I am a believer in Caleb Williams, where I know that a lot of NFL fans are sort of out on him. I think it's more so about his personality than his actual talent. Now, again, the decision making, some of the sacks that he took in this game were a little bit reminiscent of some of the issues for him when he was at USC. Caleb Williams is somebody that does have this superstar potential, and at USC, especially considering the fact that he was playing for a team that didn't have much of a defensive presence in either of those last 2 seasons, that he felt like he had to overcompensate a little bit and make star plays happen. This is the NFL. There is so much more talent surrounding you at this point on both sides of the ball. No need to run around and try and get yourself out of jams like that. Just make the right play. Don't make the stupid plays. This is a Bears team that I think overall on paper is good enough to be able to win even without superstar play from a quarterback. And I think it's just going to take maybe a little bit of time for Caleb Williams to sort of get that through his head, that for the first time in years, he's playing on a team that doesn't need him to be Superman. He just needs to be a reliable, good option. And with the talent that he has as a player, I expect him to reach higher heights. It's just not what they need from him from day one. Yes, this is a Bears team that has hopes for the first time really in a while. I know they had a little bit of excitement headed into 2023. I was never really on board with that, but I do think that now, yeah, sure, the Bears are sort of building up some momentum here, but it's not all on the shoulders of Caleb Williams. And you're going to have people, putting you down and expecting you to be excellent from day one, in large part because of how the media has covered him, throughout these past couple years. But it's natural player development here. Nobody walks into the NFL the best player in the league. And I'm not saying that Caleb Williams is going to be the best player in the league because, frankly, Patrick Mahomes exists, but Caleb has a chance to etch himself with the elites in the league. But again, there's no need to sort of rush the process there because the Bears are further along than a lot of people sort of anticipated coming into this point, and I think he's going to be just okay. This was, I would imagine, just as bad as the Bears offense is going to look all season, frankly, because it's hard to get much worse than what they had. I will say this, the offensive line I was disappointed in because I've been somebody that saying, oh, well, actually, if you look at the Bears offensive line, they've been making a lot of moves in these past couple years to try and help shore up the group a little bit more. They've heard for years now about their inability to protect Justin Fields, that's where they're investing money and draft capital into. And ultimately, it was pretty lackluster performance as a whole from that Chicago offensive line that I'm definitely going to want to see more from them as well. Got very little push on the ground game. DeAndre Swift is a player that I think is good in moments. I do feel like his name carries a little bit more weight than the actual talent that he is. But even with that being the case, I think they're a pretty deep running back room anyways. Khalil Herbert, I think, is a very nice second option, a little bit more of a power back. Roschon Johnson, according to ESPN, is listed as 4th on the depth chart. But there were moments last year when, or maybe it was 2 years ago, when it was Herbert and going to coming out of this. But let me know what your takeaways are in the comment section. But we are now going to be moving on to, after talking Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick out of 2024, I want to switch gears here to the 2023 first overall pick in Bryce Young, who continues to struggle early on in his NFL career. And I have some thoughts on whether or not the clock and the time is running out already on Bryce Young, just 17 or so games into his NFL career. So we will be diving into that. But first, we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we just finished up talking about Caleb Williams and the Bears' performance. Lackluster offense, but ultimately able to get it done. For the Carolina Panthers and the 2023 number 1 overall pick in Bryce Young, they didn't get anything going offensively, and they had a much different result where they ended up getting bludgeoned 47-10 in a season-opening loss, as things do not seem to be all that improved from what was a disastrous 2023 season. And really the eyes turn to Bryce Young here, where we understand there are a lot of different factors at play here for why Carolina is bad. Their defense isn't good. There really aren't many options for Bryce Young on the offensive side of the ball either, but he has given very little, if anything, to really be excited about. I think there was a Packers game last year that actually went okay for them, where they were hanging in for a while, and that was a little optimistic there. Outside of that, it has been really rough for Bryce Young's beginning tenure in Carolina, and things didn't get any better with their loss on Sunday. Bryce Young was 13 of 30, 161 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Now, he did have a rushing touchdown. If you want to be a little bit of an optimist, that sure, that did happen, but at that point, I think that this game was a really big red flag for where Carolina is currently at. Now, again, it's important to keep in mind that Bryce Young does not have very much talent surrounding him. But in most ways, I've been very concerned with the overall level of play of Bryce Young. Now, I was never huge on him as he was coming into the NFL either, so it's not like I've ever really been an optimist for Bryce Young. If you are, let us know why in the comments section, because genuinely I am sort of curious what the pros are. Now, I didn't follow him extremely closely when he was at Alabama, but a lot of the sort of idea around the upside about him was sort of the playmaking ability and the fact that he can make things happen when he gets outside of the pocket as well. We haven't really seen that whatsoever, and I've actually been very disappointed in that sort of playmaking creativity, because you're talking about a player in Bryce Young that is one of the shortest quarterbacks in the NFL already, so it's not like you can really imagine him as this elite pocket passer, as it is anyways, that just because of his physical limitations, it's not just the height, too. It's that he doesn't really have a great arm necessarily either. But even when he gets outside the pocket, I mean, he's missing throws. I believe it was, sort of running up in the pocket where he ended up throwing that second interception. He had a wide open Adam Thielen, who actually made a pretty good decision on a little bit of a broken play, just ends up choicing his route up a little bit more and just totally airmails it, ends up falling into the arms of a defender of Jordan Howden. And I think that everything that we've seen from Bryce Young has been really concerning. Now, he made a couple throws, I suppose, in this game. He put together a pretty solid drive towards the end of the first half where he ends up, getting them some points right there going into halftime. At that point, the game's already lost, but even still, it's just about the process of Bryce Young, of seeing, can he learn from mistakes, can he get better, and I don't know. I think that ultimately, he had a good touchdown drive in that third quarter that he did cap off with the rushing touchdown. There we did see a little bit of that playmaking creativity. There was a throw rolling to his right where he was able to hit Xavier Legette for a big pickup. Then another solid throw rolling to the left where he hit Jonathan Mingo. So I think that if you're a Panthers fan really looking for optimism, I would look at that drive at the end of the first half and the touchdown drive in the third quarter. That being said, there was a lot of negative. And like I mentioned, I think that the physical limitations on Bryce Young already are a huge handicap for him. If he's going to sort of find a way to pull this out, I think he has to be way better mentally and processing wise, because there were multiple times where, this also does fall on the shoulders of the offensive line, which is not very good, even with them investing into a couple of guards in the offseason, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. Offensive line still did not look good for Carolina, but that being said, multiple times Bryce Young and the O-line just were not able to recognize the blitz that the Saints were firing, and multiple times Bryce Young got himself lit up. And, a little bit of a shout-out, I suppose, as well to Alontae Taylor for the Saints, the nickelback corner for them. That was excellent in this game. He ended up getting home to Bryce Young 3 times in this game, but, a couple of them as well. Like, he was just running untouched because there was just a failure to recognize the pressure that was to come from the Saints defensive front. Ultimately, nobody ends up blocking, and Bryce just sort of, even though he knows there's probably a free rusher coming, or maybe he doesn't, which is another one of those issues, is just unable to get the ball out of his hands quickly and, just avoid taking a sack like that. And Bryce was brought down 4 times in this game as a whole. Now, again, a lot of that's on the offensive line. I do think that Bryce is, partially responsible for that as well, because the pre-snap recognition doesn't really seem to be clicking for him up to this point. And I hate to just, water things down to a player's physical stature, because if we know anything about the NFL, it comes in all shapes and sizes. Aaron Donald is maybe one of the best defensive players in NFL history, if not, at least in my lifetime. He's my favorite / him and J.J. Watt. It's a little bit of a toss-up for that greatest of all time, but that's a whole different debate there. But Aaron Donald was, for an interior defensive tackle, was nowhere near the usual status quo of what size you have for a defensive lineman like that. Like, he was able to practice first off, hitting the weight room, a physical specimen despite what his overall size and stature was, and the strategist that he was. And that's the thing, is Bryce Young, I feel like maybe it's because Carolina has been such a dumpster fire in years past that, he hasn't really been able to pick up that part of it yet. What I will say is, I'm a big fan of Dave Canales, who the Panthers just hired as their head coach. We've talked about his path multiple times throughout the course of this show, that he was, in large part responsible for the development of Geno Smith in 2022 when he won over the Seahawks job, sort of turned Geno into a positive starting quarterback once again. Had a similar role as the offensive coordinator in 2023 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which saw Baker Mayfield have the best year of his career. So, if you're trying to be optimistic about how this is going here for Carolina, that Canales now has a full game's worth of tape that he can show to Bryce Young and try and help him develop from there. I think it would be pretty irresponsible to fully write off Bryce Young for the season just because of how week 1 went against a pretty tough defense as well. But that being said, it has not looked good. it has looked very bad, actually, up to this point, and I'm hoping that he's able to figure this out. I am not optimistic about it at this point, which sort of takes me to the next point of where do things sort of stem from here? Because the Panthers invested a lot to trade up to get that number 1 overall pick to draft Bryce Young in 2023, including, of course, DJ Moore and what ended up being the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft. That there's probably going to be slight, reluctancy for the Carolina Panthers to move off of Bryce Young. But that being said as well, I do look at that Panthers situation, and we just saw a very similar sort of, for what I'm about to say, we just saw the Chicago Bears draft Justin Fields. Now, obviously, different draft capital invested into that pick, but Justin Fields came into Chicago, and everything around him was sort of a mess. The offensive line wasn't good. There weren't any weapons, and ultimately, as much as Justin Fields may have never been the guy, even though, look, we talked about this yesterday, looked pretty good, in my opinion, against Atlanta over the weekend, but he didn't have what it took to sort of fully prove to anybody, let alone the Chicago Bears, that he is going to be a franchise quarterback. And the Bears passed up on using the number 1 overall pick to replace Justin Fields once. They weren't going to be able to do it a second time. And now Caleb Williams steps into a largely improved situation. So there are going to be people, if this season does not go well for Bryce Young, calling for the Panthers to draft his replacement. And I'm not saying that that would be the wrong decision, but I would also take into consideration the fact that Dave Canales got a lengthy contract when he became the head coach of Carolina. The front office, it seems, understands that the Panthers are a long way away from being playoff competitive once again, and you'd probably just be setting up whoever else that next guy is, Carson Beck, or maybe a Quinn Ewers, maybe a Shedeur Sanders. Take your pick. Way too early in the college football season to really make the predictions on who will be the number 1 quarterback to come off of the board. But whoever it is, they wouldn't be walking into any sort of an improved situation, and we could see this exact same thing play out once again. That if you're the Panthers, if Bryce Young forces your hand and he really gives you nothing to build off of, again, I can understand it, but I feel like the Panthers have just so many holes on both sides of the ball. They need to establish the offense once again. The O-line and the wide receiving core are 2 of the worst units in the NFL. And that's something that whoever the replacement is going to be in trouble walking in day 1. So ultimately, again, to fully put a bow on this all, I am very concerned with what I've seen from Bryce Young up to this point. Again, as somebody who's never been a believer in him, but we can also acknowledge that the surrounding factors are also pretty disastrous as well. And Panthers fans are going to start to get impatient, and I understand, but you have to take into consideration as well, Rome wasn't built in a day, and this entire roster needs some serious overhaul. That quarterback might not be the number 1 need at this particular moment. Now, it's probably up there, but I don't think that you'd be doing yourself any favors sort of doubling down on a quarterback position when there's no legitimate number 1 wide receiver. The offensive line is messy. I just think that there are already a lot of holes. So I'm concerned with Bryce Young, without a doubt. I'm also just as, if not more, concerned with the rest of the roster as well. So that's sort of where I'm at on Bryce Young. Again, hoping that over the course of this season, as him and Dave Canales build up a little bit more of a rapport, that they can work some things out and try and salvage the investment into Bryce Young. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We'd love to hear it. But we are now going to dive into one other team that, again, we don't love harping on the pessimism here on the GSMC Sports Podcast, but one other team that looked a little bit disastrous on the offensive side of the ball, and that was the New York Giants, the one team that was unable to punch it into the end zone in Week 1. So we will be diving into what went wrong for them and where this is all going to play out, because vibes are low right now in East Rutherford, that's for sure. But we will be diving into that. But first, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're going to now be diving into what is going on with the New York Giants, who it seemed like were trending in the right direction a couple years ago when they hired Brian Daboll. They made the playoffs, they won a playoff game, and since then it has been all downhill. And it was so bad that after Week 1 performance, Brian Daboll was having to answer questions to the media about whether or not Daniel Jones will continue to be their starting quarterback, which is when you're having to answer those questions after just one game, you know things are not going particularly well for you. And it was based off of the fact as well that Daniel Jones really struggled in the season opener. 22 of 42, 186 yards, and 2 interceptions. Not to mention the fact that this other sort of weapon that he has going for himself is his legs. Didn't get much going for himself in the run game either. So definitely a concerning performance from Daniel Jones. And you know, we'll just sort of rip the Band-Aid off here. This feels like a situation to me that it's sort of already written in the stars that this will be Daniel Jones' last season as the starting quarterback of the New York Giants, because of the fact that they do have an out in his contract this offseason, and if they don't pick it up then, the remainder of his deal that he signed a couple years ago will be fully guaranteed. And I can double check here the exact numbers of how much they would owe him moving forward, but I can tell you confidently it's not one that the Giants are going to hope to pick up, because it was a 4-year, $160 million deal when he first signed the extension. And if they were to not get rid of him this upcoming season, he would have a $41.6 million cap hit for the Giants in 2025, and he would have a $58.6 million cap hit in 2026. And even the most optimistic Daniel Jones fans would pretty clearly understand that Daniel Jones is not worth $58.6 million. Very hard to build a team around that. Now, Daniel Jones is somebody that, you know, I've never been a fan of necessarily. He was good enough during the playoff season in 2022. I didn't think he was excellent, but he at least was more reliable in terms of limiting turnovers, and him and Saquon in the backfield, they were a very good running offense, and that is something that, yeah, you have to consider in terms of when you talk about the evaluation of Daniel Jones, that he does, in theory, have a couple layers to his game, but that being said as well, there's no way the Giants end up picking up this contract, because just because you can run the ball does not equate you should be making over $40 million. And this year it's already 47.8. And you saw the results in Week 1. They were the only team in the NFL to not score a touchdown in week 1, which is a brutal mark, especially considering this game was against the Minnesota Vikings, where they were playing at home. You're getting Sam Darnold, who hasn't played football in what feels like multiple years, on the road, and you kind of ended up getting dominated. They lose the game 28-6. Darnold, by the way, I mean, not to dump on him, looked pretty good in the game. 19 of 24, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. I'm just saying, we saw so much bad quarterback play over this past weekend. Sam Darnold, I would not consider to be on that list of quarterbacks who played poorly. So, that's its own sort of other story there. But as for the Giants here, I think that Daniel Jones, I do have sympathy for him, considering the fact that he has been a little bit of the scapegoat, I feel like, for the Giants these past 2 seasons, where ultimately he is not an excellent quarterback. So there is that, and everybody can be saying the truth there. I also don't think he is the reason why they aren't a good team, because overall, I think the Giants are one of the messiest situations in the NFL entirely. And I actually this morning texted one of my friends that is a Giants fan. I asked him, what's your take on Daniel Jones from this past weekend? And he proceeded to send a list of texts that included just the dysfunction about Brian Daboll and how he's now totally out on Daboll. This is a situation that we've talked about on the show before, that Daboll has been reportedly on the hot seat, and I couldn't really understand, but it sounds like behind the scenes things are really messy. He's benching Jalen Hyatt because of some sort of a grudge that is going on between the two, and it's not an area, especially at wide receiver for the New York Jets, that you can really afford to turn away a talent because of a personal grudge that, sure, you have to hold up the integrity. You can't let yourself get pushed around. But in this situation, Jalen Hyatt, and it's not like I think Jalen Hyatt is, a top-end wide receiver, but the Giants have very little right now. Now, Malik Neighbors looked pretty good, so that was encouraging. Wan'Dale Robinson is fine, but ultimately not very much talent whatsoever at the wide receiver position. Their offensive line is still abysmal at this point, and now we're seeing their defense sort of start to have cracks as well. Again, with my friend that I was talking to, he was talking about the fact that Kayvon Thibodeau, who was one of the most exciting young players when he first emerged out of Oregon a few years ago, and he's really been without any big-time signature performances, and he had practically no impact in Sunday's game against the Vikings. Just 1 quarterback hit was the only stat that he recorded. He got absolutely pummeled by Christian Darrisaw at one point as well, and that's a tough matchup without a doubt, but just has not developed into the player that they were hoping for, and that is sort of the idea as well, that since Daboll has taken over, player development has been very limited, where you're talking about Thibodeau, who hasn't really evolved into what they were hoping for, and Jalen Hyatt struggling to even see the field. Evan Thomas was a top 10 pick in the NFL, and he has been terrible since he really was drafted by them, and just all of these different factors as well. It does sound like the situation in New York is getting a little bit toxic, which sort of brings me to the fact that I don't know how many wins are going to be on the schedule for the Giants this upcoming season, and this might have to be a clean house situation where, again, I liked Daboll when they hired him. I thought he was very good play calling wise in 2022, understanding what the strengths and weaknesses of that team were, the fact that they were never going to be an air raid offense, that they were going to balance the rushing attempts of Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, and that just has been a mess since that 2022 season. Joe Shane, the general manager, the Giants have been pretty incompetent at drafting, like I mentioned. Maybe you want to blame it on Evan Neal. Maybe it's on the Giants. Another sort of lack of player development in this situation, / maybe just a bust, was Kadarius Toney as well a couple years ago. So the Giants have been just struggling to actually, fill out their roster in the way that a lot of people expected them to, including myself, as things were trending upwards for the Giants. And I have some stock in some of the players in their secondary. I'm a fan of Deonte Banks. Tyler Nubin is a pretty nice player as well that they just drafted in the second round. That it's not like they are talentless, but they're pretty directionless right now. And I think that we're going to have to see a real 180 for Brian Daboll and this Giants organization in terms of how they can even function in terms of, can we get past all the toxicity and the drama that has been taking place behind the scenes for the Giants? They need to be so much better than they currently are, and expectations were low coming into this year, but getting blown out by the Vikings in week 1, even that is, not living up to expectations there. That game at home, ultimately they're going to face off on the road against the Commanders this upcoming week. And I'll double check here what the overall strength of schedule looks like for the Giants, but they were a team that already coming into this year you knew was probably going to have an uphill battle to stay afloat, and things have only gotten worse. Line was 6.5 coming into this season. According to Sharp Football Analysis, he has them with the middle of the pack strength of schedule, 14th in terms of easiest schedule. So they're gonna have games ahead of them that aren't going to be cupcakes by any means. They do play in the Germany game against the Panthers, who we just talked about in the last segment, that were also a disaster. So, I feel for the people of Germany when that game comes to town. But overall, just a disastrous situation for the Giants right now. And again, this does feel like they might have to be cleaning house soon enough. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. If you are optimistic, let us know why. But we are going to now head into our final segment of the day, where I'm going to be giving my thoughts on this past weekend in college football and reacting to the latest polls headed into week 3. So we will be right back with all of that. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be reacting to the Week 3 college football AP polls and talking about some of the biggest drama from this past weekend. Now, the headline game coming out of this was, of course, Notre Dame falling to Northern Illinois. How about Northern Illinois now being ranked? Huge win for them, but ultimately, I think that this is more of a statement on Notre Dame, and this is a team that, coming into the year, I mentioned it on the show, I'm not very confident in, and it was a nice win against Texas A&M. I did actually have some good things to say coming out of that, because that was an offensive line that, of course, was, very inexperienced, and this is a lot of new pieces on the offense that I was hoping that Riley Leonard could be able to develop a deeper passing game. That's something that the Fighting Irish were just about entirely out of with their week 1 game against Texas A&M, and maybe this was a situation against Northern Illinois that they could build on that. That was not the case. Riley Leonard in this game, 20 of 32, just 163 yards passing and 2 interceptions. So the Fighting Irish dropped from number 5 all the way down to number 18, and down 13 spots. This is a situation for them that I actually said after that A&M win, I'm almost a little bit relieved that Notre Dame won that game, so that now when they're sitting at the end of the year with, 1 or 2 losses, at least they have something on their resume to make them deserve it. Now at this point, losing this game to Northern Illinois, I was just never really a fan of them coming into this year. I do like Marcus Freeman a lot, and I'm rooting for him, but I can't trust Notre Dame, and that's such bad analysis is the reality that, you can't just look at the logo and not trust them, but they are one of those teams, and ultimately, they kind of tend to prove you right if that is what you're just going to stand by. Now, from a more analytical standpoint, I think it is just the lack of dynamicism on that offense, where they really are yet to develop any sort of a intermediate to deep passing game. Riley Leonard is yet to throw a touchdown up to this point. And yeah, it's cool that he can run, and if you can build off of that and have that be your backbone, they have a couple good running backs as well beside him that they should be able to, if they can win at the line of scrimmage, they should be a good ground and pound team. But again, that can only take you so far. It did not take them very far at all, as they only scored 13 points in this game against Northern Illinois, and now they are down at 18. At this point, again, it's not that I'm rooting against them necessarily. It's just that I don't believe in them, and I think it would be really frustrating for me as a fan, and I'm sure for a fan of any team that is sort of hovering around the bubble there, that they're going to get knocked out because Notre Dame didn't really play all that difficult of a schedule, and they end up losing just 1 or 2 games. Now, at least one. The other 2 big games for them are against Florida State, who has clearly proven that they aren't all that good either, and on the road against USC, which I think they lose that game now at this point, but, we'll have to see, because that is, months away at this point. So, Notre Dame, the biggest faller, of course, and the biggest story out of this. Michigan, also a significant faller. Weird situation there. Texas is really good, so give Texas their credit as well. Going into the Big House and pulling out that game, Quinn Ewers was excellent, and it was ultimately a throttling for Texas in this game. I think it's more about Michigan. We talked last week about the distrust in the offense right now. Sounds like as well that I wasn't even fully aware of this until just about a couple hours ago. Our boss here, Tate, pointed out that Sharon Moore might not even be fully guaranteed on a contract as the Michigan head coach. That I gotta look more into that, but it might seem like Michigan's just sort of treading water for the year, trying to figure out how this investigation stuff breaks for them, and then ultimately they go in a different direction after this year. But they definitely don't have any answers on offense right now, and they deserve to drop as far as they did. If not, it's a good team in Texas that they lost to, so I suppose 7 spots is enough, but they do drop out. Tennessee, the biggest riser in this game, considering they sort of beat the doors off of NC State, ranked number 24. It was one of the 2 ranked matchups we had. It was that and the Texas-Michigan game. Neither one of them ended up being all that good, but it is definitely, good to see Tennessee sort of rolling like this. I think that they are one of the, top SEC teams that really didn't get much excitement at all coming into the year. I I feel like a good portion of that is maybe because of the unknown that is Nico Iamaleava, and he wasn't excellent in this game, did have 2 interceptions, but what you do like to see about that, and maybe it's a little bit of a cop-out as well, especially considering the fact that they were up by so much, that it's not like he threw an interception in a high-leverage moment that, the pressure wasn't necessarily there in the same light, but he didn't let it define his game, and I just think that the physical tools, you see some of the throws that he makes, and I just think that he has excellent touch on the ball. The accuracy is pretty good as well. Somebody that I think will develop into a very good quarterback someday. Tennessee, it's interesting because now they are ranked number 7. They're up 7 spots. They were the biggest riser from last week to this week, other than, I suppose, again, Northern Illinois, who was unranked. And even the fact that they're sitting there at 25 feels like a big-time win for them, but, ultimately, we'll see how long that actually lasts. I would, argue probably not very long. But as for Tennessee, they seem like they are now in a position where they could definitely make a run here towards the playoffs, and that's something that was definitely sort of an outside shot coming into the year, but, now they have a couple convincing wins under their belt. NC State, a good win. NC State isn't exactly an elite team, but, they were ranked at the time. We'll see where they finish at the end of the year, but they were expected to sort of be one of the top teams in the ACC after a Florida State and a Clemson that, we'll see how long, and a Miami, of course, that they were sort of the 4th team out of that pecking order in the ACC, that the ACC just not looking very strong at the top, but again, a whole lot of football left to play this year. But Tennessee has some big games on the schedule to sort of further establish quite how good they are. First one is good, that's really going to show us something, I would argue, is in a couple weeks from now, going into Oklahoma to take on Jackson Arnold and the Sooners. That should be a real statement for them. At this point, Oklahoma, a couple weeks out. I hate looking at betting lines this far in advance, but, they're going to be underdogs headed into this matchup. Oklahoma is a good team. So, we'll see with Tennessee, but, as you look at some of those other SEC teams that have stumbled a little bit, LSU coming out of the gates hasn't been quite as dominant as a lot of people were anticipating, and I just think that ultimately, especially if Notre Dame's dropping out of this as well, we could definitely see Tennessee, continuing to rise. So good to see them where they're at. And then the other sort of big notes, I suppose, I would throw out there. Oregon continuing to not really live up to expectations just yet. I came out after their week 1 win against Idaho and said, oh, well, this is something that they sort of got punched in the mouth a little bit. They should anticipate that they can, that they, once they sort of fully lock in, there's a much higher ceiling, and that is absolutely the case. But it also doesn't look like, this... the offense put up 37 points against Boise State. Boise's not exactly a great defense either. That's a team that let up 30-something, I believe it was, to Georgia Southern in week 1. It was probably more than that, actually. That game was extremely high scoring. It was, 45. So putting up points against Boise isn't all that impressive. I think that Dylan Gabriel's a good enough quarterback that I'm not totally concerned there. The defense has... in this game, though, not great. And it's also a Boise State team that, as much as they allow points every week, they also score points. So ultimately, 34 allowed. Ashton Jeanty looking like he could maybe, the Heisman is a quarterback's award, but we'll see how this works out. But 9 touchdowns for him through 2 games. That is incredible stuff from him. And you got to give credit there, but also Oregon, you know that this is a Boise State team that's going to come out and try and beat you through the run game. Not being able to make that adjustment. They come away with the win. They're still undefeated. They're still ranked in the top 10, but once again, in a win, dropping a couple spots, and they are now at number 9. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, what your biggest takeaways are. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.